Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. It's wild how a fringe conspiracy theory can completely mutate into a massive global pop culture phenomenon. Today, we're unpacking Nazi UFOs, the anatomy of a myth. And to really get it, we're going to start by looking at an absolutely extravagant 1990 tabloid headline that perfectly lays out the blueprint for this entire modern mythology.
I mean, just picture the sheer absurdity of this. Nazi astronauts launched in 1943 return to Earth. That was literally blasted across the front page of the Weekly World News back in 1990. The whole story claimed 3 German astronauts went into space during World War II in a flying gyroscope, and then just came back 47 years later without aging a single day. No way, right? It's a completely wild claim. But here's the thing, it hooks us. It uses a super familiar cultural trope, taking a very real historical foundation and just inflating it into an impossible secret achievement.
So the big question we really need to figure out is, how on earth did real historical engineering mutate into this impossible legend of spacefaring astronauts and flying saucers? Because, to understand how we get from actual, tangible, wartime engineering like the very real V-2 ballistic rocket all the way to rumors of secret polar bases and anti-gravity engines, well, we've got to peel back the layers of a deeply strange and surprisingly persistent conspiracy theory. Which brings us to Section 1. The Nazi scientist trope.
This is a pop culture archetype we all instantly recognize, right? It basically blends authentic German technological advancements with straight-up science fiction, secret bases, and dark occult mastery. Just think of the villains in almost any spy thriller or comic book blockbuster. Because the Third Reich actually did produce genuinely revolutionary weapons, like early jet aircraft, the public became kind of primed to believe almost anything regarding alleged secret wonder weapons. It completely blurred the line between advanced technology and pure fiction.
When you actually break this mythology down, you find a very specific, very potent recipe. You start with those authentic historical achievements. Then, you mix in some science fiction narratives, like anti-gravity engines. Add a heavy dose of fictional occult knowledge. And finally, top the whole thing off with supposed extraterrestrial contact. This creates this incredible cultural feedback loop. The fictional portrayals make the claims feel familiar, which in turn makes these extreme pseudo-historical claims feel, well, surprisingly plausible to certain audiences.
Moving right along to Section 2, The Architect, Erich Halich.
Meet the man himself, Erich Halich. He was an Austrian mechanical engineer, and he was actually the very first person to fuse flying saucers with far-right occult mythology back in the early 1950s. The dark irony here? This guy, who spent all his time writing these grandiose theories about galactic empires, secret superweapons, and epic cosmic struggles, was actually working the night shift as a porter at a Coca-Cola plant in Vienna just to support his family. Yet his wild imagination would become literally foundational to a global myth. And man, Halich didn't waste any time. Writing in this obscure Austrian Esoteric magazine, his claims escalated at lightning speed. In 1951, he drops his first UFO article. Just a year later, in 1952, he's suddenly connecting UFOs to medieval Cathar rituals and the Holy Grail. And by 1954, he's outlining this massive geopolitical polar empire operating occult aircraft. He went from analyzing ancient symbols to building a full-blown spiritual cosmology in just 3 short years. That rapid escalation brings us to one of his wildest concepts, the Manna Sola. Halich defined this as a theoretical ritual artifact, essentially a levitating disk straight out of Gnostic traditions. He basically tried to argue that the flying saucers people were spotting in the sky weren't extraterrestrial craft from Mars or Venus at all. Instead, he claimed they were ancient, techno-magical artifacts powered by cosmic Mani crystals, just flying around to distribute a Gnostic sacrament to spiritually uplift humanity. Yeah, he essentially turned the UFO into a flying religious object. But he didn't stop there. He tied these crafts directly to surviving factions of the SS, inventing what he called the Polar Empire. He geographically and ideologically split them into a battle of dark occult extremes. So you had a solar Luciferian faction at the North Pole using a golden sun emblem, and a Saturnian dark magic satanic faction at the South Pole using a black sun emblem. He envisioned this ongoing metaphysical war between these hidden extremist bases. And this bizarre fantasy, it laid the absolute geographic groundwork for decades of future conspiracy theories about secret bases in Antarctica. Let's jump into Section 3. The pseudoscientific pivot.
Okay, so up to now we've got magic crystals and esoteric polar empires. But eventually Halleck must have looked around and realized that talking about Gnostic sacraments really wasn't convincing the broader public, let alone institutional science. Which brings us to a massive inflection point. The year, 1957.
The packaging of his theories changed completely, even though the core mythology remained exactly the same. Look at the shift. Pre-1957, Halleck was all about the Holy Grail, the Mana Sola, and purely spiritual terms. But post-1957, suddenly, the guy is dropping pseudoscientific jargon everywhere. He starts talking about electrostatic propulsion, which is basically the idea of using electric fields to create thrust, along with filing actual patents and using field equations. He completely swapped out his occult language for the language of the space age.
He took very deliberate steps to legitimize his myth. Step 1, adopt technical academic vocabulary to sound super credible. Step 2, file vague aerospace patents, and he actually did this in Austria, submitting official patents for flying wings and electrostatic aircraft. Step 3, present these ideas at mainstream UFO congresses as cutting-edge experimental physics. By translating his occult speculation into electrostatic pseudo-technology, Halleck was aggressively seeking institutional credibility. He desperately wanted people to think this was hard science, not just fringe magic.
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 4, Anatomy of a Conspiracy.
Tracing this whole thing through the decades, we start in the 1950s with Halleck's occult UFO theories, and then we see that pivot to his electrostatic science in the 60s. But then it kind of goes quiet until the 1980s, when a brand new generation revives this esoteric neo-Nazism. And finally, in 1992, a text called Das Vril Projekt completely consolidates the modern myth. Halleck's early merger of extreme ideology and fake science literally laid the absolute foundation for a much darker network of far-right propaganda to build upon.
Authored by Norbert Jürgen Rothofer and Ralph Edel, Das Vril Projekt took all these scattered myths and forged them into one massive, totalizing space opera cosmology. I mean, it absorbed Halleck's ideas of polar bases and secret craft, and then casually added in channeled communications with aliens from Aldebaran and interstellar wars. This little booklet basically became the master template. It's the direct source code for the modern online conspiracies you see today regarding Vril and Haunebu flying saucers. And this is exactly how dangerous propaganda gets laundered. Just look at the flow here. It originates in the 1950s occult milieu through fringe Austrian magazines, setting the ideological foundation. Then, in the 1990s, far-right groups expanded into a full-blown cosmology via pseudo-historical booklets. And finally, in the 21st century, it bleeds directly into pop culture and the internet. The final outcome? Unwitting mainstream consumption. People just casually encounter these Nazi UFO designs in movies or video games, completely disconnected from the extremist propaganda that originally engineered them. The author of our source material, Maurizio Verga, perfectly summarizes the true danger of allowing these fringe myths to go unexamined. He writes, "I remain struck by how technological fantasies can be repurposed to serve as vessels for political extremism, often sailing under the false flag of alternative history." It's a really powerful reminder that these aren't just harmless, wacky sci-fi stories. They're deliberately constructed vessels for an ideology. Understanding the anatomy of this myth really equips us to see the ideology hiding right behind the entertainment. Which leaves us with a final question to ponder next time you sit down to watch a sci-fi thriller or play a video game featuring secret World War II wonder weapons. Will you reconsider where your favorite tropes actually come from? Keep asking questions, keep looking at the evidence, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.